Okay, so to start off today's show, I have a special segment for you guys, and I'm not going to lie, this is a segment that I have been thinking about for a while, and I've been looking forward to doing on this podcast for a really long time. And for those of you guys that are listening to this show right now, that have been listening since the beginning, last year when I started up this show, you guys know that I'm a huge baseball fan. And not only a huge baseball fan, but a New York baseball fan. I live in New York. I'm a huge Met fan. The Yankees, I don't hate them or anything. They're not my favorite team, but I think baseball's better when the Yankees are good. I pay attention to them. I follow what they're doing. I like to critique Aaron Boone. And the thing with baseball is it's basically a local sport. And what I mean by that is you're going to be paying attention during a normal season to primarily your team, probably the other teams in your division as well. Maybe do some scoreboard watching, especially as the pennant race heats up going towards October. But you're not going to be following all 29 other teams in, May or June. You may be keeping track around the league, seeing what players specifically are having good years, things like that. But you're never really going to be going around the league and seeing, every night what individual team and what each individual player does. And I think this year, those circumstances can be a little different because in only a 60-game season, every game does mean so much. So if you're a Yankee fan, you're going to be wanting to keep track of what the Tampa Bay Rays, the Boston Red Sox, the Toronto Blue Jays are doing. Same with the Mets. I would think probably a little more specifically in their case because the top of the NL East right now can go many different ways. You have the Mets, you have the Braves, you have the Phillies, you have the Nationals, and the reason why I bring up the Mets and the Yankees to start off today's show is I wanted to talk a little bit about both teams on this segment and talk about going into this season, about 2 weeks away, things I am looking for in both of these teams. And if you guys have been listening to this show over the last couple weeks, you'll know that coming up very soon, we are going to be recording an MLB preview podcast, a half the episode breaking down all 15 teams in the American League, another half episode going over all 15 teams in the National League. We'll have a couple of guests on as well. Really looking forward to that. About 2 weeks away from the start of the baseball season, that podcast will be released for sure before the season starts. But I wanted to talk a little bit about New York baseball. And the reason why I brought up baseball being such a local game is because the Mets and the Yankees are the two teams I know best. The Mets or the Yankees are the two teams that primarily during a typical regular season, I have the most research on, I know the most about. And to start off today's show, I wanted to give you guys some thoughts on each of these two teams and what my expectations are and what I'm thinking about them going into next season. So we'll start off with the New York Yankees, and we know what the narrative has been for them over the last couple of years. In 2017, going into that season, they had a young Aaron Judge, they had a young Gary Sanchez on their team, but they weren't really expecting going into the season to win the World Series like a lot of other typical Yankee teams have in the past. But we all remember what happened. That team ended up getting to the wild card game, beating the Twins after the Didi home run. They beat the Indians in the best-of-5 series, coming back from down 2-0, and they draw very close to beating the Houston Astros in Game 7, but they lost Game 6 and 7 on the road in Houston, and they fall short in 2017. In 2018, I got to be real. If I'm a Yankee fan, I kind of just take the L there. The Boston Red Sox, and I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, did they really deserve to win the championship? They might have cheated. Like, the MLB hasn't really finished their full investigation into the Boston Red Sox scandal, and I get it. Like, there just hasn't been anything proven yet. So I just think the 2018 Red Sox were really, to be honest, one of the better baseball teams I've seen in a while. So the Yankees lose a tough 4-game series, 2 disappointing home losses, but nothing you could do. Last year, the Yankees have a great regular season, especially when you consider the circumstances, when everyone was getting hurt, and still the Yankees find a way to win the American League East title. That was really, really impressive. And for all the Yankee fans that have a lot of confidence going into this season, and they should, the last year makes me feel much better about how this team could handle possible adversity that comes into a 60-game season. But now, when we look at last year, we know the Yankees beat the Twins in the playoffs. That was kind of a given. The Yankees always beat the Twins in the playoffs. But that Astro series, I think, did show a little bit of the Yankees' flaws. And we all know the main reason why the Yankees didn't win that Astro series is because they didn't have the ability to come up with a big hit. How many times was Edwin Encarnacion or Gary Sanchez, Aaron Judge up in that series just hacking and literally having zero shot at the plate? But there are going to be a lot of storylines that go into this Yankee season. Number one, even though I mentioned that the bats in the Yankee lineup were the primary reason why they lost that series to the Houston Astros, the reason why I think last year, for a big majority of the season, that even though the Yankees were really good and had one of the best records in baseball, I don't think they were ever really considered to be the World Series favorite, because when you looked at their rotation, they just didn't really have that guy that popped. I like Masahiro Tanaka. He's a big game pitcher, but when you look at his stuff, it's like a good number 3, a decent number 2. You look at James Paxton, who was a little up and down last year, but he really did show me something in that game, Game 5 against the Astros, with the Yankees down 3-1 against Justin Verlander, facing elimination, and he got the job done in a big spot. Aaron Hicks hit the big home run, and the Yankees ended up getting the win that game. That showed me something from James Paxton. And he was good in Seattle, but he's not that ace. That ace is Garrett Cole. And with the addition of Garrett Cole, I do think it kind of puts the Yankees in a little bit of a different position this year than in years past. I feel like over the last couple of years, Yankee fans really did expect to be good, to be competitive. But if they didn't win the World Series, they'd be disappointed. But it wasn't the end of the world. This is going to be the first year in a while, and I know circumstances are different because of Corona and everything that's went down. Circumstances are going to be different, but expectations are not. If the Yankees don't win the World Series, their fans are going to be upset, and they should. When you look at this lineup, you have Judge, who should be healthy, and him staying on the field is obviously a huge question mark if you're a Yankee fan. You have DJ LeMahieu, who had one of the 3 or 4 best individual seasons in baseball last year. He had a legitimate argument at the MVP. I'm going to be curious to see if he's going to be able to put up those numbers again, but even if he falls short, he's still really productive. I think he's really established himself as a consistent everyday hitter. And then you have Gleyber Torres, who, this might sound like a hot take. I think right now, if you ask me directly, who will the Yankees' best hitter be in 2020? I think it's Torres. Last year, he was one of the only players that was able to stay healthy for the full season. He hit over 40 home runs. He's still super young, so he's only going to get better and better. And I feel like if I'm a Yankee fan, that is the one guy I'm really watching. Plus, you have Miguel Andujar coming back healthy. You hope for a bounce-back season from Gary Sanchez. And we know over the course of Gary Sanchez's career, he really does have the ability to heat up in short stretches. You also, bring back a couple of the depth guys that played well last year, like a Mike Tauchman, like a Luke Voigt, like a Mike Ford. Brett Gardner as well should be getting a bunch of at-bats. You also have a healthy Aaron Hicks, which you didn't expect to have in the beginning of the regular season. And when you also consider the bullpen, the pitching, the Yankees right now, when I look at their roster, clearly are the most talented team in the American League, but especially during a short season, the pressure could really get to them. And if they don't win the World Series, if they don't at least get to the World Series at minimum, which I think is very possible, especially in a 60-game season, Aaron Boone and the Yankees are, they're going to face some pressure and they're going to face some heat from the fans. But when you look at their roster and when you look at how much money Brian Cashman invested in this team, it does kind of make sense. And this roster is loaded. This team is loaded. They have the postseason experience now. They've experienced the heartbreaks. So if I'm a Yankee fan, even in a 60-game season, it's World Series or bust. And then I'll get to the New York Mets, my team. And last season was such a wild ride for this New York Mets squad. We all remember everything that went down, from Pete Alonso's breakout season to Jacob deGrom's second consecutive Cy Young Award, from Jeff McNeil continuing to hit on a day-in and day-out basis. Those were some of the highs. And then some of the lows, Edwin Diaz, Robinson Cano wasn't great. You had Yoenis Cespedes falling off of his horse. Mickey Callaway just making dumb decision after dumb decision. But what I will also say is this. The Mets had some moments last year, And I think when I look at their team this year, I actually think they're set up to be in a pretty good spot. And I'll tell you why I think that. Also, I'll bring up some concerns. I'll start off with the concerns. You could ask, a lot of my friends, and when we record the MLB full season preview podcast, I'm going to have two of my very good friends on, Brian Krinick and Brian Acker. I remember towards the back end of last regular season, I was telling them, guys, the Mets need to re-sign Zach Wheeler, and if they want, trade Noah Syndergaard. Give me Wheeler long-term over Syndergaard. I remember saying that, and I'm not making this up. I'll ask my friends when they come on this show if I said that. And Zach Wheeler really impressed me last year. With that being said, did he get a little overpaid by the Phillies? Yeah, but when you consider how many other players in baseball are getting overpaid these days, big picture, it's really not that big of a deal. Especially when you consider, how the baseball salary cap is set up. So they lose Wheeler. And then Noah Syndergaard, as we know, I believe it was right after the coronavirus and the quarantine started, gets Tommy John. So that's my number one concern. Besides Jacob deGrom, what other pitchers are going to be able to step up? You have Marcus Stroman, who also is going to be pitching in a contract year, so you would hope that elevates his game to be pretty good. And then the Mets also bring in two new starters, Rick Porcello from the Red Sox and Michael Wacha from the St. Louis Cardinals. If one of those two guys could step up and pitch well, I think the Mets are fine. You also have Steven Matz, who, with Syndergaard getting hurt and the loss of Zach Wheeler, if there ever was a time for Steven Matz to step up, it's now. He's another guy that's always been a little up and down throughout his career, but he's shown his moments. He could throw a complete game shutout last year. People forget that. And this year, he really has a chance for the first time, I think, since he's gotten in a Mets uniform, to really break out and elevate his game and really help the team. He's once again been super inconsistent. He did stay healthy all of last year for the most part, which I'll give him credit for. Hopefully he's going to be able to do that again this year. But that's my number one concern for the Mets, is their starting pitching. Because I look at their other two units, right? Their bullpen. The Mets bullpen last year was historically bad. If they had an average bullpen, they would have made the playoffs. All Met fans know all the games that happened last year where their bullpen just completely screwed up. Whether it was the game at Wrigley against the Chicago Cubs, whether it was the game in LA when Edwin Diaz's season just fell apart from there. Arizona, you guys remember that series. You guys obviously remember the national game when the Mets had, I believe, a 6-run lead heading into the 9th inning and lost. So the Mets bullpen, and I'm not just saying this about Edwin Diaz, I'm saying this about Familia, I'm saying it about the addition of, Dellin Betances. All those guys should be pretty solid, hopefully, for the Mets, and hopefully one of those guys, Lugo, Diaz, Betances, Familia, Brad Brock is back. Hopefully the Mets bullpen could be better and better. And I got to be honest, when I look at this Met lineup, it's really impressive, man. When you have Wilson Ramos behind the plate, Rosario at short, Cano at second, Jeff McNeil at third, Alonso at first, and then an outfield preferably of J.D. Davis in left, Brandon Nimmo in center, and Michael Conforto in right, with Cespedes DHing, hopefully. That's a really good lineup. That's a really deep lineup. And when you have the guys that could hit for power, Alonso, Cespedes, hopefully, McNeil, Rosario, that's a guy I expect to break out, along with guys like McNeil and Nimmo and Conforto that could get on base. I'm expecting a big year from Conforto with his contract season, approaching pretty quickly, not after this offseason, but after next season, so next offseason. And Cespedes coming back, he hasn't really been healthy in 2 years. I think he has a real opportunity now. He's another guy that's going to be in a contract year that's really going to have to step up. So when you look at the Mets, they play in a tough NL East. With the Braves, I think right now they would be my favorite to win that division, but the Mets were competitive last year. And I think the expectations for this year's Met team going into the season were much higher than last year's expectations for the Mets going into the season. You also bring in a new manager in Luis Rojas. The whole Carlos Beltran fiasco that went down, it's going to be interesting to see how the players as a group respond to that. But the fact that I just spent about 15 minutes talking baseball with you guys, there's literally no better feeling. I cannot wait for the sport to be back. And you guys know that during the 60-game season, we're going to be talking a ton of baseball on this podcast.